Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to start with Commissioner Kariq. Thank you for your testimony. I know my Liberal colleagues on the committee like citing what's happening in the United States in American papers, but we're in Canada, and I want to talk about what's happening in Canada today. Recently, York Regional Police reported that a man walked out of a Newmarket court after being released on bail and immediately attempted a carjacking before stealing a truck and hitting several police vehicles. Now, Commissioner, is the status quo in our justice system in terms of bail and in terms of sentencing creating dangers for your police officers on the street?
Thank you for your question. Certainly, the prevalence of auto theft, the prevalence of repeat violent offenders,
Ontario Provincial
not
Police.
being incarcerated is creating a danger for my officers, for officers right across this country. Great improvements with Bill C-48, and there's the 5-year period to evaluate it. We're looking forward to seeing what improvements come as a result of that, but there's absolutely more that we can do, as I've highlighted in my recommendations.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to go to Mr. Service. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we know that scrap yards are an area where vehicle parts, it's not just vehicles, but it's vehicle parts, it's cloned VINs are being sourced from scrap yards. And Alberta had a policy in that was basically forcing scrap yards to record who the sellers were and their information. It was ruled unconstitutional in November of last year because the court said this was federal jurisdiction, criminal code jurisdiction. Do you think the federal government needs to do more to ensure that our scrap yards are not becoming a source for stolen vehicle parts and stolen vehicle VINs?
With the advent of technology, the ability to sell parts from vehicles all over the world has become exceptionally easy. And I think that regulation around how those can be dispersed and what records you need to keep are critical. If they're not provided the level of regulation as VIN assignment and VIN issuance should be, then the process will continue, certainly.
And I mean, it's great to see provinces taking the initiative, but it is discouraging when a court rules that it's federal jurisdiction in terms of these keeping this information. So clearly the federal government has a very important role to play and needs to play that role. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. We'll move on to Mr. McKinnon, please.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are for Mr. Service. I'd like to follow up on the questions about VINs. So my impression previously was that VINs were established by the manufacturer, and you're telling us that's not the case, that by and large, individual jurisdictions assign VINs?
It happens both ways. So manufacturers, if they apply, they go to what's called a WMI, a World Manufacturing Index number, the first 3 digits of a VIN, of a 17-digit VIN. Those identify who the manufacturer is. Now, in cases where the province has to assign a VIN, I'll use Alberta as an example. They have a WMI that's issued by Transport Canada for any VINs that they issue, and it's for a variety of things. Perhaps it's a home-built trailer, or perhaps it's a vehicle that is amalgamated from 3 other vehicles and currently no longer does the VIN that's on the vehicle accurately describe what it is. So there are circumstances in every province where a VIN is necessary to be issued from the province itself.
Okay. So I'm interested in, so in Canada we have 13 jurisdictions provincially, right? Mm-hmm. Provincially and territorially. Are these systems for registering vehicles, is there any interoperability between them? So they exchange data, you know, if they say this vehicle comes from Nova Scotia, we can check to...
I'm glad you asked that question. Absolutely. We do cross-Canada checks all the time. But what happens is this. When someone takes a stolen vehicle from one province to another, they'll walk into a busy registry location. The person behind the counter will have to do an initial query, then do a cross-country query, then do a vehicle history check. They might even have to make some phone calls to determine what the history of that vehicle is and whether it's legitimately for sale in the province that they're in. And those questions become pointless if you have no one that you can send out to validate what you're being told. So that's what's happening now, is that you see a lineup of 20 or 30 people out of a registry office and a clerk without the training, without the experience to legitimately validate a vehicle that's in front of them, simply pressing a button going, okay, we're going to register it now. Here's the reality, sir, is that...
I'm going to interrupt you here because I've only got like 12 seconds left. Okay. So Is it a good idea? Is it possible that these validations could be done internally within the software in each province, but registered vehicles, they automatically do a check?
That was the question I was going to answer. These vehicles cannot be validated without a physical inspection. It is not possible.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Ms. Michaud, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais...
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Service on the same topic, and I'll ask a similar question to the question I asked Mr. Brochet earlier about VINs, about series numbers. There are some ill-intentioned exporters who switch up series numbers, and then sometimes cars are sold online on online auctions. And series numbers are sometimes repeated many times in export declarations, but border services are not able to detect that. In your view, with your experience, how can the CBSA improve its procedures to better detect these fraudulent VINs? Mr. Brochet seemed to say that that's quite difficult to do. Do you have an idea regarding how the agency could go about that?
Certainly, there are people better qualified to speak to the CBSA practices and policies than I am. I can simply say that in all cases, VINs are unique unto themselves. There cannot be more than one that accurately represents a vehicle. So if you have a duplicate, one of them is false.
Merci. Et comment on fait pour ça?
Thank you. But then how can one determine that it's a duplicate?
Physical examination. If you have two in two separate locations, you have to literally go look at both of them to determine which one is the false one. And frankly, the people that are doing cloning and revinning, they are really good at it. You need an expert.
J'en comprends que...
So, if I'm not mistaken, cooperation is essential. Police agencies tell us that they need to have a good reason to believe that there's a stolen car in a container. They need to believe that there may be a problematic content in a container in order to investigate the container. So if there was better intelligence sharing and information sharing between, for instance, border services, police forces, port authorities, do you think that that sort of cooperation would be a good first step forward?
Absolutely. I think that information sharing under the auspices of legitimacy and authority, information sharing is key to having an impact on this type of crime. Absolutely.